Welcome everyone. Yeah, welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon for whatever, depending on the place that you are right now. And we're here today to introduce Top Coordination Show edition, episode 7. And as always, I like to remind you that this is it's a space that we created by the community members for the community members to share the journeys of our members and possibly make this experience somehow useful for you. Maybe there are tips or pieces of advice that you can use in your career in your own journey, and it's always nice to get to know the people like we work with, we hang out with, or whatever the reason it is that you're here in Topcoder today. And I'm Luis. I'm known as Maestro from the community. But as always, I'm not let's just keep this moderator today and introduce our special distinguished guest, which is David. This is how you should pronounce it, but let's call him David for now. And he's right now located in Switzerland. He's born and raised in Hungary, and he's been a TCO finalist for marathon or data science track, as it's known these days. He qualified last year. He went to the virtual TCO. He also qualified this year. So we have a veteran member. And by the way, is going to tell us a nice story about the first ever top marathon match held at Topcoder. So we're very interested to hear about that. So welcome, David. How are you feeling today?
Thank you. Welcome, Luis, and welcome everyone else. Yeah, it's nice. So hopefully it's a very nice day actually here in Switzerland. So we had these huge rains and floodings in the recent days, and finally today the sun is shining. So I think everyone is set up. Everything is set up for a nice interview and a nice talk today.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And by the way, thank you for making it here today. I know that you have a busy schedule, and we're glad that and grateful that you can make it. And as a reminder for everyone, this is how this interview works. Just a little bit of expectations for you to know how it's going to happen. So it's in the first 20-30 minutes of this interval. I'm going to steal the precious time of David to interview him all by me, all my questions. But we know that this is a Ask Me Anything format, right? So after these 20 minutes, I'm going to read the questions that you guys sent me through the Google form. I'm going to read them to him, and he will be replying them real live for you. But if you didn't have the chance, or you didn't see the link for the Google form that I was sharing, there's a button here that says Q&A. You see below in Zoom. You can write down your questions in there, and after we go through the questions from the Google form, I will also go through these, and then David will happily address these questions. So right off the bat, let's get this started, because David, I understand, and I'm going to start with an off topic, and and I understand that you have some sort of participation or involvement somehow in a quite famous European television show. And I would like you to let us know what this was about.
Yes, so that was an interesting part of my career, so not my main job. So whenever I try to see what was the most challenging thing that I did during my career, I spent 9 years at Google so far, working on lots of interesting things, spent work in banks, insurance companies, building data warehouses. But actually, the one project I had the most fun with was a small 2-3 months like side project. It just came in through a friend, which was actually making software for a TV show.
Wow.
So it's I think it was the Hungarian adaptation of the show called The Million Pound Drop in Britain. I think in the US it wasn't that famous, but in Europe it was presented in a few countries. And actually what was special about this TV show, that at least in Hungary, this was the first like this TV game, which they broadcasted live. So usually for these games, they record them and then they edit them and then they go on the broadcast. But this one, they like announced it hugely that, yeah, this is the first time a TV game is going on live, which also meant that the software had to be perfect. Like it's, And we were sitting, there were lots of rehearsals, but on the first show, we were sitting there in the TV studio. Everything was set up. I had like 2 different laptops with development environments, source code loaded, because the producer said that, yeah, if something goes wrong, they can show some advertisement for like 5-6 minutes. That's the time we have to fix it. So I was like there completely nervous, like make sure that the files are loaded. I can make a build and a release in like a minute or so. But luckily everything went fine. So I was just super stressed, and it was amazing to see how the TV works from behind the scenes. I've never seen that before. So it's like at least 100 people with cameras shouting, God, move to camera 2, camera 3, and it was amazing. So I had this experience twice. So I worked on another show as well, but that was a long time ago, like 10 years ago. And I really hope that one day in my career I'll get there again, because I really like the atmosphere. So it's completely different to what's like normal software development in office works. It's like the whole thing is very lively. Everything happens immediately. There is really like no possibility of failure, or at least very little. So it was a very interesting project. I loved it. I'm very grateful for the friend who actually passed it on to me. And I really hope that one day I'll get to work with TVs and movies again, because it was really a challenging, a super challenging and stressful, but also a great fun part of my career.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. Just you was just talking, and I just kind of trying to put myself into your shoes. I imagine the rush that you felt, like trying to make things work and not avoiding any sort of failures. And you know, when they tell you you're live and there's like 2 million people viewers watching you live, it's like it doesn't make it any easier, I guess. And yeah, to add a little bit more of context for our audience, this show is called the £1,000,000 Drop, and I'm not sure if it's quite famous in your countries, but it is somehow partially, we can partially compare it to this famous show, the million Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, some sort of in the same lines, that there are hard questions that have to be replied. And yeah, it's super fun. And what exactly they have to do the software that you built for this show? They had, maybe I guess that you show the questions for something like that. But.
Yeah, so it controlled like 4 or 5 screens, which showed the questions, showed the score, showed the amount of money. And actually the way this game worked is that there was a question, there were 3 or 4 different answers, and every answer had a trapdoor related to it. And you actually had the money as like physical bills there, and you had to distribute the money on the trapdoor. So if you were very certain of the answer, you could put all your money on that one, and then it didn't drop down to the container. But if you were not sure, you could like say that, yeah, I split my money, and then of course some of them like you lost. And my software also controlled the trapdoors actually. So it's
man.
But yeah, mostly it was used to control some screens which were shown on the camera. Yes.
Wow, man. And imagine if there's like a little bug that instead of 1 million, it puts like, no, this person didn't win 1 million, but 1 billion. That would be kind of messy. Yeah. We have Victoria here. She says, hi, hey guys. She's also, by the way, she's also fellow Hungarian.
Yes, I know. It was her interview that I watched to prepare for this one.
Okay, that's great. That's great. You watch a good one. You guys look, she said, oh my God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, this I guess this experience coding for a TV show, it requires some serious coding skills. And this is the point where I would try to head the conversation on. It's about your coding skills. And yeah, just to get started, what is it that you do now? I mean, as a profession or as a role, that of course that has to do with coding.
Unfortunately, not so much lately. So I work at Google for like 9 years here in Switzerland, working mostly on processing various logs from search YouTube and making some useful information out of it. And that's probably all I can tell about that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, lately my job has like not even half coding. So it's lots of talking to people, meetings, presentations, reviewing stuff, and all that. But coding, actually, I started quite early. So I had one of these Commodore 64 computers.
Wow, man!
Like 20, no, more than 30 years ago. And even when I was like 10, 11, I was like trying to figure out how these games work, what people do to make them work. I tried writing some small basic programs to see how it works. And then I liked it. So I just kept doing that as a hobby during school. And then when it came to choosing a university or some higher education, it was like quite naturally that was coming. I was been doing that for many years back then. So I went for a computer science, computer engineering major. And that's, of course, at university, you don't learn much coding. It's more like maths and the science behind it, but eventually that's how it came to be.
And do you recall which was your first programming language when you were a kid, like when you were, tinkering and fooling around with the Commodore?
Yeah, on Commodore 64, that was definitely basic.
Yeah. And do you remember the first application that you said, wow, like this can lead to something like,
That's an interesting question. So there as a kid, I just tried basic stuff. And then later when I had a PC, I think I started experimenting with Pascal. And there I made a game which plays like, I think it's called checkers, when you have to put like the X's and the O's and you have to have 5 in a row. And I tried to put like some very basic intelligence in there, and I was super amazed that once it beat me.
Wow, man. That's when it started.
It was nothing like machine learning today. It was just a basic if statements tagged into one another. But the first time it beat me, I was like, oh, okay, that's something.
Yeah, that's when you say, oh my God, there's potential here. Yeah, that's quite interesting. And well, then I guess that as you progress through your career and you started fooling around with coding, I guess, everyone has a definite favorite language. If you had to choose one language, what would that be and why? I mean, and how did that happen?
So for me, that would be C#. So that's the language I used at my first job where I was 6 years. And it was interesting because at university, I didn't really study C# and .NET. I was mostly working in Java in the last 2 years. And then I went on a job interview at a company for a Java job. And I did well, and they said that, yeah, okay, but I had 2 friends in the same company who were working in the Microsoft department, who were working with .NET, and they convinced their boss to accept me in the group, even though I have absolutely no C# knowledge, because they knew that I'm good from the university, and I also would have loved to work with them. So I started my first job as a C# developer with absolutely no knowledge of C#. I spent like the first 2-3 weeks on the job just trying to figure out the basics of the language. But then it became natural, and I still, up to today, that's what I say my favorite language is. That's not the one I use on Topcoder, because there in C++, I am better at making faster things. Also at my job at Google now, I use C++ and Python, but still, until today, I would say C# was what for me looked like the cleanest language I've seen.
Yeah, it's elegant. It's super elegant. Yeah, and and I can see also. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned that you didn't know anything about it, and you have basically, let's say, not learning from scratch, because if being honest, in fairness, when we are in coding schools or computer engineering, if you know a language, it's easier, to learn a new one. But it takes me to this point, which is the challenge of learning something new, either if it is a language or a methodology or anything. And how do you approach that? And how do you think, how do you think it's best to, at least for you, from your experience, to learn something new, something that you don't know? How do you approach this situation?
So for me, learning always works by the example. So so for me, it doesn't work that I like read a book how this language works, and that just doesn't help. I usually try to find some toy problem, and then I try to solve that. So find some basic stuff and try to do it in that language or with that toolkit or in that framework, and then build on top of that, trying to do more complex stuff. So for me, this is the examples which help. That's also same at my current job. So we have very nice internal documentation at Google, but every time I need to understand something, I rather go to the source code, look how it looks, what it does, because for me, that's much easier to understand than reading through the documentation.
Yeah. Learning in the trenches. I think that's a pattern that is common among all of people who are here in Topcoder. Actually anywhere around outside of Topcoder, because we have been learning like this for millions of years, and by example, watching others doing something and replicating them, rather than language, which is fairly new for us, to be honest. And that's something that I wanted to board, because it's also related to Topcoder, learning a new language, because we know there's people who they come to Topcoder, maybe they don't know much about Java, for instance, which is, I think, one of the top languages that they use for SRMs and Marathon, and they may feel a little scared or somehow not willing to learn something new. And this takes me to translating this to Topcoder, in the sense of you arrive to the platform in some way, which we're going to discuss how you discover Topcoder. Well, assuming that you arrived to Topcoder, how was it for you to face this platform in terms of okay, I have to learn something, because you have to learn how to use it, and then have to learn how to solve these problems. How was this experience for you when you first entered Topcoder in your career?
I mean, there was the UI, which I had to make myself familiar with. So when I started, I still started with the short matches, the SRMs. I think back then it was I think it was a Java applet which handled the competitions. And yes, it was, it needed some time to get used to. Also, it needed some time to see how other people approach these problems. So I always had the problem that, I type, but then the time runs out and I never get there. And then I look at the top finishers code, and they have these shortcuts, these 1-2 letter shortcuts for the mostly used idioms. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. I don't have to type like 80 characters to get this done. Just type 3. That probably helps with the time. And I think it really helps to look at how other people approach the problems, who were like more senior, more experienced. But I think you can learn a lot from that.
Oh yeah, definitely is. And it's fun that you mentioned SRM and from the start of the conversation, because that's something that I wanted to compare with you according to your opinion. And I don't know how to phrase it, but what do you find easiest to start with? Is SRMs or marathons?
I think they did a completely different kind of approach. For SRMs, you really need to focus for those 2.5, 3 hours. And that's actually hard for me. Also to find the time, like 3 hours in a row to focus on something, and also to really focus on one thing for that long. But of course, you can pick like 1-2 problems and do that. And if you don't want don't aiming for being the top one, then that's fine for practice. For marathons, it's much easier. You have like 1 week, sometimes even more. So you can have time to understand the state problem, to come up with ideas, to try it out. If I have, I don't know, have half an hour sometime in the middle of the day, I can work a little bit, try something there. If I don't, then I don't. If I have time in the evening, I can again sit down and work on it. So for me, Topcoder is like more relaxed. So marathons are more relaxed. I don't feel that rush of adrenaline that I really need to stay completely focused for this time. It's more like, if I don't think about it for half a day, that's fine. If I get some nice idea on a bike ride to home, that's perfect, because then I can try it out later in the evening. So that's why I ended up not doing SRMs that much, but mostly doing the marathons.
Oh yeah. It's understandable that they both. It's like comparing. I know. I mean, to be fair, I knew that we were comparing oranges and apples. They require different kind of skill sets, and SRMs, of course, has this rush, this extreme speed that you must have to solve problems in a very short amount of time that have certain difficulty. But yeah, if assuming, I mean, as someone like me, let's say I'm approaching this interview, let's say I'm a super newbie in marathons. I mean, I understand what's going on, but I mean, in terms of solving the problems, like the way you guys do it, is for me it's impressive. And this is why it brings me these questions about the question about the fact that you mentioned the timing. You know, you said it's more relaxed because you have more time to do it. But do you think there's a way of approaching this problem? Let's say to solve a marathon problem, let's say in 2 hours, and also be the first, like just the first person who in them, the first place winning the competition. Is that something like compared to SRMs? Let's say SRMs we have like, I guess 1 hour or so. Do you think like in 1 hour you can like code a marathon problem and also win it? Is something like someone has ever done?
I think usually I can't even manage to understand the problem statement in an hour. So it's
wow.
I usually try to read. So read is fine, but then really understand what's happening, what are the constraints, how exactly the scoring works. That usually just that part takes like the first half day or so, just to really have an understanding of what I need to do. Of course, sometimes I rush and make some skeleton solution, which like doesn't do any real computation, just has some basic solution which outputs like a constant or some very simple, just to have an understanding of how the data looks. But then to have a better understanding of what is really needed to have a good score, that for me at least takes a couple of hours of thinking of. Actually, sometimes I go and sit down with a pencil and a paper, try to visualize it or draw it down what the problem is.
Wow. Yeah.
But yeah, code something working in an hour, I don't think that's for marathons.
Yeah, I got the point now. And yeah, in your process, in your own process, I'm trying to understand and decompose your process. I understand that involves a lot of thinking, and when you are trying to understand the problem, and then comes, I guess, the part of the solution. How would you say works for you? I mean, how do you start when you have to face a problem? Where do you spend more time? Is it there's like a research process? This is a modeling process, and then I guess that is also the coding phase where you actually want to throw these lines. But where do you spend more time, and how do you break it down?
So actually for marathons, I think research is quite important. Usually marathons are not super well documented problems, but somewhat, there are some areas which touch the same problem. So you won't find an article which explains how to solve that, but you might find many articles about one particular sub-problem or one slightly different problem. And then I try to see what others do, or like what the literature is saying, which should be done, and try to make it applicable to the actual problem, which is sometimes somewhat different to the actual research topics. And then I try many ideas. First, I try to code something very simple just to see if my understanding of the problem is works, or I'm understanding it correctly. I have the right output format and so. And then I try to come up with different ideas. And actually, one pitfall I usually run into is that I start to get fixated on one idea, and I just try to keep improving that one, which actually is not the right approach for marathons. So I had many times when I worked on a solution for 3-4 days, really refining it, trying to make it like yet again 10% faster, yet again somewhat better. And then I have some different idea. I throw it completely out, and one very completely new idea coded in like a few hours beats my last 4 days of work.
Oh man.
So I think for marathons, it's really important to not get fixated on one idea, but really try at least 3-4 completely different approaches. Because usually on marathons as well, we have these discussion threads afterwards where the people share their ideas. And sometimes it's very common thinking or very similar thinking. And sometimes people approach the problem in completely different ways and still end up with similar scores. So, and sometimes I'm like reading that and yeah, I was thinking about that as well, but I didn't have time to implement it, or I throw the idea away, thinking that it will not work. So if it makes sense to try out ideas where you are not even sure it works, because sometimes it's just surprising.
Yeah. It makes me think of there's this dilemma of choice, which also happens in other areas for other competitors, in especially in design. I think people can come up with different type of solutions for the same problem, and it's tough. It's tough when you have to decide. You have to choose only one, and maybe we can learn from your approach here, how or in which phase or timing is best advised to maybe try other things, because we have to consider also deadlines and timing. And I guess that if we spend some time trying different ideas very early, could be different, could yield different outcomes that testing ideas at the end of the competition. How do you see it? When would you say is the best time to test all of these ideas to choose one? And
like an hour before the finish.
Rush it.
Sometimes I do that. So I from my own experience, starting a completely new idea just on the last day doesn't really make sense. It's very rarely can I make something work in the last hours, but choosing between the various ideas, I usually leave them at the very last moment. Try to do test runs with thousands of test cases to see if there is any real winner, and then just pick one.
So maybe we could say that you try to focus on one good idea at the beginning of the when you're solving the problem, and then when you think let's say you think, okay, I'm done with this, I'm going to try other things, and you give time to test all, because I guess it's super probable, very likely, that while you are actually coding or doing something, it's going to be a lot of ideas floating around, like we should try this, should try that. Maybe you keep them in mind and then you try them at the end. That sounds wise, because if you get messed up in the middle of the process, you don't get anything done, because you're just trying things and not actually finishing any of those. Then I asked this question because normally it's important, especially when you're going, let's say, to a rushed kind of competition like TCO finals, for example. And then you have to maybe probably go there with specific mindset of how you're going to approach a problem, and just to eliminate the distractions that you can have, which takes me to TCO, Topcoder Open, which is this sort of competition that can take you off track if you are a little bit distracted. And I understand that you qualified for your first TCO last year.
Yes.
You have been a member, for a long time, and yet you qualified for your first one last year, and it was virtual. We know it, but how was that experience for you? Even though if you didn't get to meet any members, but I get that the competition was something else compared to regular marathon matches.
Yes, so it was a 24-hour straight match, which was interesting. So I did a 24-hour competition before, but this one was, I felt this one was more stressing. So that one was in a live setting, like groups of people were in the same room. Here I was like home, sitting at my room for 24 hours or leaving for short breaks. But yeah, it was challenging. The problem itself was also quite challenging. And also this, of course, I was sad that it's not a live setup, but still, I think it was fun. It was definitely something I haven't experienced for a while, like focusing on coding 24 hours in a row. It was tiring, but it felt nice. And actually getting into the final was also very nice. So it was after 15 years. So it's a good lesson for everyone to never give up. I participated in these marathons for 15 years. And then finally I managed to get into the TCO final. So, and during that journey, there was many points where I said like, okay, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm too old. I don't have time. There was also 1-2 years where I completely didn't do anything, and then still came back, and eventually it made sense. I ended up in the TCO. So
man, that's it. And congratulations for that, because I know that that feels awesome. This qualification, especially after putting so much hours, so much effort. It's an amazing reward. Which makes me think, because I know that you're very proud of this, and I'm happy to see that. And I don't know if you have thought of this, but what do you think that was probably the reason, or what caused that that you couldn't make it in the previous years? Have you thought about that?
Yes, I did. So at the very first marathons, I could spend a lot of time. So I was still like a college, like a university student, lots of free time. And yet, but back then, I don't think I lacked the experience. So it was the very first marathon matches. I also didn't have much experience with these typical NP complete optimization problems before.
Okay.
So there, the lack of experience. And then later on, when I had family, kids, I had much less time to spend on it. So I could no longer do that. Yeah, it's a 7-day marathon. So I spend for 7 days, 8 hours a day on the problem. But I could spend like maybe a few, 2-3 evenings or so. And then nowadays, I think the experience is there.
Yeah.
At least that's what I hope. Now the kids are better, so I think I can spend some more time. And just a second.
Yes, okay. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. I just stole my wife's laptop for this because in my room, the light is coming from the wrong direction, and all you see is like a completely dark face. But I forgot to plug it in. So
yeah, can happen. It's okay. Yeah. So you were saying about maybe you lack the experience.
Yeah. So now the kids are bigger, grown up, or not grown up, but at least bigger, not babies. So I again have a little bit more time to spend on the marathons. I now have the experience. So maybe these two things combined was what made me getting into the finals.
Yeah, experienced, and but you always, were you always competing at Topcoder regularly in marathons during all this time?
Maybe not all the time. I think there was 1 or 2 years around where my first kid was born, when I felt super exhausted for the personal reasons, and maybe I competed in 1 match in a year or something like that. But now I still don't compete in every single one, but now I have more time.
Yeah, And do you feel that in terms of preparation, do you study more? Do you practice more than before, or you just you keep the same pace and just would you say that it was just the experience that helped you get in there?
Yeah, I think it's the same pace, just the experience. So
Okay, yeah.
now it's much faster to code the same things which I had less experience with before. So now I know what typically works, typically doesn't work for what different kind of problems. So
Yeah.
I probably have now less solutions which I then throw away. In the beginning, it was like, yeah, I tried one idea, it didn't work. I tried another idea, it didn't work. Nowadays, from the experience, I know that, yeah, these four are probably not going to work. So I don't even spend time trying it out. I try some other which worked before on some other contest.
Yeah, I know experience and yeah, you have spent time on that, and yeah, I guess experience can also help you compare how you were, certain time before, which leads me to ask you, uh, in terms of experience, now you have the experience which has helped you, get in there and qualify to not only one but two TCOs. What do you think, or how do you think you would approach a problem called costly sorting, if that rings a bell to you nowadays?
Which
Well,
one?
it's called a costly sorting. That was actually the first ever Topcoder marathon problem ever held.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you participated in the first marathon of
Yes, I
Topcoder.
did. It was
Yeah,
15 years ago.
yeah, a long time ago.
So I certainly know much more about these optimization techniques like simulated annealing, which I didn't know at that time. So
Okay.
I'll probably like pick one of the approaches from another contest and try to apply to that problem. So back then it was really from scratch. I never really encountered these marathon-like problems before. So they are very different to what we have on the SRMs or what we have in the real world, or at least what I've worked on in the real world.
Yeah.
So now I've seen hundreds of them. Back then that was the first. So I probably now has a completely different way of approaching it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, well, there were different times. The problems were a little bit different by then. But yeah, but it's nice to have this, to share a moment with someone, because this is history. I mean, at least to me personally, this is history. Talking to someone who had the chance to participate in the first marathon match ever. I mean, this is an honor. I'm gonna when this is recording, I wanna keep it somewhere with a lot of like my precious little treasure. Yeah, yeah, because I in and this basically this kind of set the beginning of the path that you took, which was like actually just taking it. I see. I mean, by talking to you, I can see that you just took it like in a relaxed way, just practicing whenever you could, and joining marathon matches whenever you had the chance, because you had a busy life, working at Google, raising a family, and you just joined when you could, and eventually a few years later, without rush, it paid off and gave you a chance to yeah, to be part of well, not one, yeah, this TCO. You will be also there competing against yeah, tough competitors from all over the world. And yeah, about talking about that, tough competitors, is there someone in the marathon community, or someone, or many, some people that you kind of admire somehow, like their skills or something?
Well, in general, I think everyone who is around there in the top are great competitors. I really admire actually wleite,
Ah,
Vladimir,
Vladimir,
who was also there on the very first marathons, and
yeah, he
he's
was there.
like consistently on the top and winning many of them. So that's amazing talent, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, he
So
was.
looking at him, he also did them 15 years ago, and he was on the top back then. He's on the top now. I think that's really amazing. I really hope that, so this year again we will have a virtual TCU, but I really hope that one day I'll get to meet him in person as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I can tell you, he's a very cool guy. Yeah, very smooth, and fun to talk with. And yeah, we met in 2008 or 9, something like that. And from there, yeah, we always talking about football, Brazil, and stuff. I went to visit once, and yeah, we will like him. And yeah, as you said, man, he's like a legend. You guys are legends. I mean, you started this whole thing with marathon competing, and you guys still here. And yeah, that says a lot about you. And okay, I have a ring bell here, which says that we have to switch now to the questions that we collected for you, David. Are you ready for that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we have some comments here. Vicky, she says that these interviews are very dangerous. Always made me want to learn coding. And Jojo, Jojo, if you're watching this,
Never too late to start.
yeah, yeah, maybe. Well, maybe it wouldn't surprise me if you see her eventually in a couple of years qualifying for TCO and marathon. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Something here. You're gonna tell me if you see it, Dave. Hang in there. Let me not mess this up. And in theory, you should see something that says AMA with Vdave, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to put it here. And these are the questions that I've collected through the Google Forms. And yeah, David is gonna address them in here. And also, by the way, I would like to remind you that if you didn't have the chance to ask your questions in the document, you can ask them here. There's a Q&A button right at the bottom right side of the application Zoom, and you will write it down and we will go through those. So the first question, if I remember correctly, this comes from Harshit. I guess you know a guy called Harshit, right?
Yes. Yeah. Not in person, but we emailed and communicated a lot. Yes, and he's doing a great work in organizing all these.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I started writing problems yet.
Yeah, why haven't you started writing problems yet?
So most likely, I think it's because of the time. I somehow feel that making a good marathon problem is a lot of time, lots of research, not to accidentally make a problem that's too easy. I remember that one case. I think it was not yet the official marathons, but a marathon style Intel programming series, also hosted by Topcoder, where there was one problem which happened to be very easy, and with the careful optimization and making sure that the cache hits are high, you could get a perfect solution, and there were like 40 people tied on the first place. I still remember that. That was 15 years ago, so I'm afraid of making a problem which I somehow overlook some research, and it turns out that it's some well-researched problem and already has like perfect solutions.
Yeah,
and also time. So I think as a problem writer, I should be there really every 7 days. There's no more worst experience than asking a question and then not getting answer for many days. So it mostly is because of time. I never feel that I can really like spend those 7 full days there to be part of the competition.
Yeah, and it's good to know this. I mean, what it takes to write a good marathon problem, because in my head, here in my little world of ignorance, I said, okay, it just takes creativity. You think of a problem and then you write it down. But I'm just finding out that it involves a research process, creating. I guess that you have to create the test cases for that, and also you have to taste it yourself and make sure that you don't make something that is gonna make everyone first place. And
maybe it will come. Maybe it will come in time. Maybe in a few years I'll have even more time and I'll start writing problems. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, when your kids go to college, you will have more time. And okay, I'm gonna have more time to write. Okay, that's cool. The next question is: have you competed against Saiho? Does that add any pressure? No, I guess. Good one.
I did. He was there in the TCO finals.
The finals,
last year, and also like on individual matches, there were many there. He was part of. If that adds any pressure, so no. Like I think everyone who is there in the top is very good and adds like equal amount of pressure. So yes, it's a pressure to compete against the best people in the world. But I don't think that any particular person would add any extra pressure. But of course, if I look at the leaderboard and I see that someone is way ahead of me or way ahead of like everyone else, that's of course like makes me think more that I'm probably have the wrong approach, and probably I have to completely rewrite my solution from scratch to get to the same performance as the others.
Yeah, I would say maybe maybe the like a good approach to answer this, it would say that the person doesn't add any pressure, but the score is the thing that adds the pressure.
Yeah, you're right. Yes.
yeah, that's a psychological it has a psychological effect in there. Another one is which competition is better, SRM or marathon? We kind of talked about this. I spoiled it.
Yeah, for me, it's more like marathons because I can better split my time when I can spend some time on it or not. For me, SRMs focusing for 2-3 hours, sometimes in the middle of the day, that just doesn't work out. So for me, it's marathons. For SRMs, it's probably easier to start with because they're typically also easier or medium problems as well. And there you can have a good and working solution in probably short amount of time. So that's better for practice. For me personally, to really be among the best, that's marathon because that's where I can put more time in or more focus in.
Yeah, I can see that. And yeah, it makes me go here in a little bit of a tangent. But what about these? There's people who can compete successfully in both of them and actually win stuff like either SRMs or even TCOs. There's people who can perform well in SRMs and marathons at the same time. That's to me that's kind of impressive too.
Yeah, I guess you mean tourists mostly, and yes, that's impressive. That I think at one point he even won both in the TCO.
Yeah. AC Rush used to also do this. I mean, even wleite, he also he has he's prolific at both, and yeah, this is super impressive because normally there's a tendency to be an specialist or either SRM or marathon, but then come these sort of people who, I don't know, they're aliens or I don't know what, but they come with this. They come with this. Another one we have here is what's the toughest problem you have ever solved? Aha, they got you.
Yeah, for me, I'm not sure if this question is about Topcoder in particular.
Yeah. Or let's narrow it down to Topcoder. Yeah.
Let's narrow it down to Topcoder. Yeah. So for me, the toughest ones are the ones which involve geometry. So when it's like circles, rectangles, triangles, overlapping areas, that's where I get completely lost, and I can never get them work, or at least never get them work on the first or second try. I always need like many approaches and many tries until I get them right. So actually last year's TCO final problem where you had to place these
the pizza
triangular or these rectangular and circular the toppings on the pizza. That was actually, I think, one of the toughest one I had in my Topcoder career. So I just now looked back before this interview, and clearly in the amount of code that I put into a solution, that was like twice as long as the second place over the 15 years.
Wow. Yeah, and I appreciate your being candid and honest about talking about the toughest problem you ever had. But I please hope that this doesn't that people who write problems, they're not gonna write another problem about geometry after you said that. Just to
I will prepare much more this time.
Yeah. Well, at least I mean, some sort of let's say weakness or not very strong point you can work at. Okay. We have the next question. It says, what makes a good data scientist?
Wow, since I'm not a data scientist, it's hard to answer, though I did take part in these some of these data science and machine learning competitions. So I think nowadays the tools are very easy to use. So I think, of course, you need to learn the tools, R or Python or whatever one's favorite is. But I think to work with data is the most important is to really understand the data itself. Like not just look at it and say that, yeah, it's a bunch of numbers, I'm good with numbers, so I'll just treat them as numbers, because that doesn't work. I think for data science, really have to understand the underlying problem. We had recently one of these data science competitions, which were about predicting the surface of the Earth, or the elevation on the surface of the Earth from some millions of years ago. Yeah. There I really read some articles about how the continents moved around, how this whole topology is measured and studied. So I think for data scientists, it's really important to understand the data, not just take a number, but really understand how it works, what the client wants as the outcome. I think that's also important. And also cleaning the data properly. I've never seen, in a large data set, I've always seen like few outliers, which are completely ruin any kind of calculation that you want to do on the whole data set. So look at the data, understand the data, especially the ones which doesn't fit into the average, and then I think that's already a good start. And then the tools nowadays really make it easy in like half an hour to make some machine learning models. So that's not the difficult part anymore, but really understanding it.
Yeah, that's a creative and intuitive part of the brain right there. And yeah, it's nice that you mentioned that, because it makes me think of the complexity that involves solving a data science or marathon problem, which is not just coding, because coding is a skill that you can learn, but it's actually the challenge of learning how to think and the research process behind that. Because as you mentioned, let's say we have a problem about fish in the world, and it means that you have to do research and learn and be very have a wide spectrum of knowledge of things. If you don't know it, you have to learn it. Well, research about the ocean waves and how when does the sea rises, when does it go lower, and the depths, and maybe they tell you to calculate how many fishes where there will be in 200 years from now, and how you do that. So it takes a lot of thinking and research and comprehension of topics that is not just coding. This is my point, that it's not just coding. It takes a good amount of knowledge to deal with here, and which is, by the way, why I admire people who can make such as predictions, or at least work with that. I mean, that's something admirable. People who have the courage to go and try to predict how things are going to be, or just even if it's just in terms of data, that's just admirable, intellectually. Sorry to steal your time there. And I think, we arrived to the end of the live chat questions. I'm going to read the question that we received in the chat. We have 2 questions here. They are both anonymous. And there's someone who says, I get intimidated by marathon matches. What is the best way to get started with marathon matches?
I think don't get intimidated. So clearly, the very first time people will do a marathon, they will probably not end up in the top positions, and that's fine. That's just think that was the same for everyone who started the marathons, also the people who are now on the top. So don't get intimidated, but try to think of some simple solution first, and make that work. So at least you have like a valid score, and then you already have a base where you can build upon and try different ideas, and eventually it will come. So also in my case as well, for 15 years I was competing, and then after 15 years I managed to arrive in the final. So, but yeah, I understand the frustration. So when I went through this journey, there was also these times that I said that, yeah, it's not for me, I'm giving it up. So I do understand this feeling. I had the same, but don't give up. Keep trying. Look at what other people do. So usually the solutions are shared, and especially even if the code itself is sometimes difficult to understand, but the ideas themselves are also shared in nice free text in the forums, and those are super helpful. So there were many cases where I applied something that I learned from someone else a couple of months or years before, and in a future problem that helped.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's very. You just kind of described a manual, yeah, for getting started with marathon matches. If we can summarize it, I would say start small, because we know that intimidation is an expression of fear or something. And yeah, if you one of the antidote of fears is action, and if you take it small by small steps, as David said, that can be a good start. Like just have some decent score, try a solution, and as it evolves, as you evolve through the journey, and then you start uh, learning from the solutions that some other people wrote, and then 15 years later or less, you will be at a Topcoder Open. Yes. Yeah. No, I think the important thing is just get started. Get started with something, throw some lines of code, and try to shake off that fear, and by doing something, just putting some effort. We have another question. It says, can you please share some getting started with marathon matches tutorials? Okay. I think
Yeah, it's very similar to the previous question, I think. So
yeah,
there are
yeah,
no good tutorials like go through these coding examples and you will be good at a marathon, because marathon problems come from all kinds of topics. So it's in SRMs, there are these typical, I don't know, 100 algorithms which come up, and you just need to realize which one is actually the problem will resolve into. But for marathons, they are usually these open-ended problems. That they're not one good solution, but different approaches have better or worse performance. So there's no such tutorial like, here is how to write I don't know, a Dijkstra algorithm or something. Look at past problems, look at past discussions, look at how people solve the problem, and then try to build on top of that, on top of that on your own.
Yeah.
I think that's.
And would you say if there is a place to practice, even if it's not Topcoder, don't worry about it. I mean that, but there's a place where people can go and practice to sharpen up the skills for marathons.
I think on Topcoder there is one marathon problem which is like open for practice, or maybe even more. One I definitely see coming up, but maybe there are more. And I think that one is a not too difficult, but also not too easy problem. So there, I think that's very good for practice.
Yes. I think I know what you mean. If you hear me here a second, I think it's the practice.
I think it's called Snake. I think it's called Snake Charmer, but I'm not entirely sure about the name.
Yeah, getting the link. I think if you go to this page, to whoever asked this question, you will see there a Snake Charmer. Yeah.
Yes.
There's an open marathon match in there. It's called Snake Charmer. It's open for a long time, so you can have your first experience with marathon. So I don't know who asked this question because it was anonymous, but you can go there and give it a try, as David suggested. Just start small, get some score, and throw some lines of code, and I guess this is where the magic happens, when you throw some lines of code and then you compare to others, and there's like an aha moment, like, oh, this is how David solved it, and and then you learn. I think that's a one good way that David suggested, learning by doing, by example. Yeah, that's okay. Let me see. Okay, I think we have arrived to the end of the questions. So yeah, what an experience, what a educational conversation well, at least I learned a lot. I have to confess, David. It was enlightening, and we are right to the end. I want to thank you all for your questions. Thank you all for your presence, for being here live with us, especially David for taking time out of his busy agenda to being with us here.
And I'm very glad for the invitation. That's like really felt like nice to be invited to talk to all these people.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome that we have the chance to and the honor to learn about how can someone like you have a persistence. If we can find one word, and I know that it's not fair because one word is just too small, but one word to describe your journey, I would say that relaxed persistence, because you didn't stress about like getting first, like being like being the first person who solves a problem or anything. You just took a relaxed approach to how your life was going at the moment. You practiced whenever you could. You joined to the challenges whenever you had a chance. But you were accumulating experience, which talks about the compound effect of accumulating knowledge little by little. And yeah, definitely a pleasure, David. Thank you so much again for being with us here today. If you have anything to say to say goodbye, the lights and the microphone is all yours, man.
Yeah, thank you for the invitations. It was really nice to talk to you. And for all the people listening, good luck. And as my example shows, never give up. It took me 15 years to arrive to the TCO finals. So don't give up. Just practice, gather some experience, and hopefully we'll see each other in person at one of these TCO events.
Yes. Yeah. Hope to see you live one day, David, too. So thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the day, rest of evening, and see you around. Have a lovely day. Bye bye.